So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm in the awkward position here where I'd never like to be, and that's between everyone in this room and more beer, which is kind of weird for me because I very much encourage the consumption of beer. So, hopefully, we'll be drinking beers very, very soon. So, thanks, Steve, for having me in. I'm excited about this. It's a pretty cool opportunity for me. Definitely my first Monktoberfest. I found out about this last year, about 3 days, I guess, after it happened. Somebody tweeted me and were like, dude, this is you. This is Portland, and it's beer, and it's tech, and you weren't there. And I said, that sucks. I got to be there next year. So I'm really excited to be up here talking to all of you guys, talking about some fun stuff. Just a quick intro, a little bit more about me. I do work for Cisco. I'm a cloud architect on the team formerly known as MetaCloud. So we help customers deploy OpenStack-based private clouds. That's a lot of fun. We're having a great time. I'm also a resident here in Portland, so I think I have the honor of traveling the least to get here. I walked out of my bedroom door, I entered the elevator, went down 8 floors, took 352 steps, I counted them, and I was here at the Portland Public Library. So that was pretty fun because I do travel a lot for work, and it was nice to have that as a change. So my commute was very simple and was not impacted by the rain. The other thing about me, I am a commercial hop farmer, essentially, as you can tell because I'm wearing boots and flannel. That is the proper attire for a hop farmer. We started the hop business about 4 years ago, I guess. So what I'm going to share with you guys today is some of the things that I learned about the hop industry that I didn't know before I started. Some fun stuff, some interesting things, or some parallels maybe to the technology world that are kind of interesting. We'll talk a little bit about what it actually takes to run a hop farm, which some of you may have been to a hop farm, some of you may never have seen it, never even known what a hop plant really looks like, so we'll go through all that thing. What's a hop? And a lot of us think of hop and we go, all right, well, we know that it's in beer and it tastes good and we like them. But in reality, what a hop cone is the female, or it's the flower of the female hop plant, right? So as a plant matures during the course of the growing season, there comes a point in time where daylight, or the length of day actually indicates to that plant that it should produce cones, and those cones are then harvested, and we use the cones because they contain lupulin. So lupulin is a substance inside a hop cone that actually contains all the alpha acids, beta acids, and essential oils that give us all the tastiness that we enjoy in Heady Topper and pretty much every beer, with a minor exception we'll talk about in a second. So to get hop cones, we obviously need hop plants. So hop plants are a perennial. They grow from rootstock, so you get rhizomes essentially, just like if you're growing an iris, typically from the Pacific Northwest because that's where most of the hops are actually grown. And they're a perennial, so they'll come back every year. It takes 3 years for a hop plant to mature, so much like grapevines, they take a while before the grapes are actually ready to use in wine. Similar idea with hops. Year 1, you get about 10% production. Year 2, 50% production. Year 3, 90 to 100% production. So they take a little bit to mature. They grow in a lot of places, a lot more than you would think. So hops grow between the 35th and 55th latitude, and that includes a huge swath of land, right? So there's no reason that they can't grow outside of the Pacific Northwest, outside of Germany, outside of Australia and New Zealand, right? They grow very well in New England, as we're proving here, as the hop yard. So a couple questions. Anybody grow hops at their house? Cool. All right, so we got a few. And Steve down here, too. I know that he has a few. Successfully this year. So that's good. Most of you probably are growing Cascade, Centennial, maybe Columbus. Those are there's 2 types of hops, right? So there's open source hops, essentially, which I'll call them, or publicly available hops in the public domain, that I can actually go and I can get rootstock from the USDA or existing growers, and there's no intellectual property tied to them. So I can go and plant 1,000 of them, and it's no issue. I can send Centennial to Germany and have a German hop grower throw in 100 Centennial plants, and it's not an issue. But then there's also proprietary hops. So if you're a beer geek, you probably know Citra, Simcoe, Amarillo, Mosaic, Lemon Drop. These are all proprietary hops that actually come and are controlled essentially by a couple of companies that own their intellectual property. So in order to grow them, you actually need a license to grow them. So I can't, as a farm in Maine, actually plant Citra, Simcoe, Amarillo, which is usually one of the first questions any potential hop grower asks is, how do I get Citra rhizomes, right? And you can't do it. So I thought it was kind of interesting. A lot of people don't know that. Kind of a parallel to the software world too, right? We've got intellectual property laws, and we've got all kinds of interesting things going on with open source. A lot of things going on there. Anybody know what kind of beer doesn't use hops? Actually, it was just mentioned in the last presentation. Gruit. So Gruit is an ancient kind of beer that actually predates the growing of hops. So it uses spices and herbs and a lot of different things to get a similar flavor profile of what we do with hops now. Actually, if you're in Portsmouth, there's a brewery called Earth Eagle Brewing that specializes in Gruits. So it's kind of interesting. It's a different take on beer, something new and interesting. What U.S. state grows the most hops? This is actually Washington. So Washington grows about 75% of the hops in the U.S. You typically think of the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Washington, Oregon. We'll talk about exactly what that looks like. But they grow the most. And then I actually put number 4 in here because I don't know the answer to this. I was actually trying to find current numbers. It used to be that Germany grew the most hops, but with the recent growth in craft beer in the U.S., I think we've actually surpassed them. So the U.S. actually produces the most hops of any country, which is kind of fun. So 98% of the hops grown domestically are produced in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. I think Washington is around 32,000 acres, Oregon is like 7,000, and Idaho is around 5,000. Interesting number here, 43,500, 44,000 acres planted in the U.S. If you guys think about farming, that's not really a lot of land, right? That's not soybeans or corn or anything like that. But we'll get into, like, what does that really mean? What's an acre of hops produced for beer, right? That's really the interesting number. Our hop acreage has grown 16% year over year. The craft beer industry is growing at 20% year over year, right? So there is a lot of growth going on in this industry. There's a lot of interesting things happening in the hop world, and there's a lot of capital investment that has to go into supporting all of our habit of drinking a ton of great craft beer made here in the U.S. So a lot of things going on. The other thing that's happening in the hop world that's kind of interesting is a lot of small farms are starting, right? So if you think about our growth in breweries, I think we're over 4,000. There's one that's opening every 12 to 14 hours. There's a number of states that have small craft hop farms, essentially, growing. So Michigan is probably leading the way in the space. New York has somewhere around 100 plus hop farms, actually. New York actually used to be the largest hop producing state in the country before Prohibition. So that's where most of the hops are actually grown. Maine actually used to produce a ton of hops too. A lot of people don't know that hops were grown here in New England and New York before that. The reason they moved west is A, Prohibition. Obviously that industry wasn't a good one to be in at that point in time. And B, we had some issues with mildews, and just the growing conditions here weren't perfect for the types of varieties we were growing, and it actually kind of went through and wiped out a lot of the hop producing farms in New England back in that time. So everything moved west, everything ended up in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Germany produced about 40,000 acres or so. Interesting thing about Germany, if you've been to Germany and drank beer in Germany, Germany has their purity laws, and German beer is very consistent. It's very good, but it's not very interesting, right? It's a lot of lagers. They use very basic ingredients, and most of the acreage in Germany, it turns out, is still producing what we call alpha varieties, right? So there's two types of hops. There's bittering hops and there's aroma hops. And with bittering hops, and to get the bitter profile in a beer, you need alpha acids. And Germany has specialized in producing a very high level of alpha acids in their hops. Now, the other thing that happens is we love Heady Topper, and we love big double IPAs, and we love very aromatic and very flavorful beers, and that's a different hop that you use for that profile. Germany is just at the beginning of transitioning their acreage from aroma hops, or from bittering hops over to aroma hops. So it's kind of an interesting trend that we're seeing happening. There's actually some really cool hops that are being bred by German growers that will be hitting the market here soon. I was out at the Craft Brewers Conference in Portland, Oregon, and they were marketing something they called a BPA, or a Bavarian Pale Ale, which is actually all German aroma hops that are new into the market. So things like Mandarina, Hallertau Blanc, those types of things are actually going to start coming in mass here in the U.S. So a lot of fun stuff going on. There's also a number of other countries that are growing hops in pretty big acreage. So Czech Republic, Poland, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, all doing cool things. Lots and lots of hops grown all over the world. When I talk about acreage, if you want to draw a parallel to what does that really mean? What does 43,500 acres of hops really mean? If I take 1 acre of hops, an acre of hops, if we're doing it right, can produce about 2,000 dry pounds of hops. Okay, so 2,000 dry pounds. What does that mean, right? Well, if you look at let's take Steve's favorite, Coors Light, which I personally think there is a place for Coors Light, and that is in the parking lot of Gillette Stadium on an October weekend, tailgating for the Red Sox when it's 78 to 84 degrees. Other than that, we shouldn't be drinking Coors Light, but that is the one time where it's still acceptable. So Coors Light. Gillette Stadium, not Fenway Park. So Coors Light, for instance, might use a 1/4 pound per barrel, right? Not very much hop profile at all in that beer, obviously. So if I take 2,000 pounds, I can make 8,000 barrels of Coors Light with 1 acre of hops. So there's a multiplier effect there, right? That's a lot of beer made from a very small acreage when it comes to farming. On the flip side of that, if I look at Heady Topper, and I looked at the recipe for that, which none of us will ever have access to, that's probably 2.5 to 3 pounds per barrel, okay? So in order to make that beer, I need, 1,200-1,500% more hops than to make a barrel of some other type of beer. So that's kind of interesting. So the Brewers Association, which is the overarching governing body for all craft brewers, has a goal. By 2020, they want all beer consumed in the U.S., they want 20% of it to be craft, right? Right now, it's 12 to 13%. So in order to do that, if I'm dry hopping and smashing these big double IPAs with a whole ton of hops, obviously I need to grow my hop acreage that I'm producing in order to keep up with that. So an interesting number here, if I grow the volume of craft beer that's consumed overall by 1%, I need 1,000 acres of additional hops in the ground, right? That's a big number. What's a bigger number is, in order to establish an acre of hops, it's around $15,000. So in order to support a 1% increase in the growth of craft beer, I need growers to invest $15 million, right? Over the course of 2020, we need to spend about $180 to $200 million as growers in the U.S. to actually support all of the craft beer you guys are drinking, right? So that's kind of cool. The other thing that doesn't really take into account is that turns out the U.S. is very well known for the beer that we produce, right? Everybody loves American craft beer. And it's starting to be exported en masse. So Stone is opening a brewery in Germany, which is kind of interesting. That's a big deal. And all of those American, domestic styles of craft beer, turns out they use American hops. So as demand grows internationally for our beer that we're making, the pressure on the U.S. hop industry is going to increase dramatically. There's going to be a hop shortage. We are contracting with customers right now out into 2020. So if you're a brewer right now starting up and you're graduated from being a home brewer, you've got this great double IPA recipe and you want Citra and Amarillo and Simcoe and you're going to bitter it with Chinook or CTZ or whatever, you better be thinking about your business plan 5 years in advance, because otherwise you're not going to have the raw materials to grow your business. Right? That's a major constraint on the growth of all these craft brewers that are starting up. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, I don't know what I'll be doing in 5 years. I mean, I know I'll be growing hops, that's for sure. And I'll still be drinking beer, but I don't really know what is going to happen in my life in 5 years. And certainly if I'm a craft brewer starting up today, I have no idea what my demand is going to be in 5 years. So it's a really interesting conversation with guys as they get going. Like, all right, so you've made 2 batches of beer. Tell me in 5 years how many barrels you're going to sell and back that off into which styles you're going to make and how many hops you need then, right? So that's a fun one. So the net of this all is we're going to need new farms. We're going to need a lot of new hop farms, or we're going to need the existing hop farms to grow dramatically. Another interesting stat about the U.S. hop industry, it's very, I don't want to call it incestual, but it's incestual, right? So there's like 40 or 50 families in the Pacific Northwest that have been doing this for 100 years, right? And over time, they've kind of married into one another, and they've had farms passed down to generations, and there's 40 or 50 families that have about 100 hop farms in the Pacific Northwest. So something's going to have to change. As far as I know, there's one at-scale domestic hop farm that's actually been created in the last 20 years, right? That's at scale. That's a 300-acre, 400-acre farm. There's lots and lots of very small farms, right? So that's kind of interesting, and there's a lot of stuff that's going to have to change in order to support this great habit that we have of drinking craft beer. So growing hops is pretty hard. It is not an easy plant to grow. Everything wants to kill it. Every pest under the sun, any mildew that you could possibly think about, everything wants to kill it. And as you can imagine, those 40 or 50 families that kind of control the hop industry aren't necessarily really predisposed to sharing a lot of information about how to grow hops, right? It's a very profitable industry to be in. They've done a very good job of it. They know how to do it with quality. So it's very hard to get started and broken into this and gain the knowledge to do it. When we started 4 or 5 years ago, there were no blogs, right? There's nobody that's on Facebook talking about how they grow their hop farm. There's no Slack room for like hop farmers. None of that stuff is a thing. Also, on the East Coast, there's really no support from the state, right? So if I'm growing potatoes in the state of Maine, I can call my local cooperative extension agent, and he'll send somebody out in the next 10 minutes to tell me what that insect is or what that problem is that I have with my crop. Not the case with hops, right? It is in the Pacific Northwest. It's not here. So it's really hard to do this stuff. It used to be there was no book on how to get started with growing hops. There actually is now. It came out about a week ago. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my counter, so I will read it. But it's really hard to get the stuff going. It's also very expensive. So, as a small business owner, one of your biggest issues is cash flow, right? And you want to limit your capital out as much as possible, right? Well, it turns out with hops, you have to spend all of your capital at the very start, $10,000 to $15,000 per acre. So if I put in 10 acres, I'm looking at $150,000. And then you don't actually get anything from it for 3 years. So try to walk into a bank and go, this is what I'd like to do, right? This is how I want to grow my business. Nobody's doing it. The cash flow situation is terrible. It's super capital intensive and extremely risky. Could I please have money at 4%? Doesn't happen, right? So it's a really hard thing to get going. And it's been a struggle, but we've figured out ways around it. We've gotten creative. We've limited the amount we have unique solutions to some expensive problems, I guess is the best way to put it. Not the easiest way, but certainly the least expensive way. So why do we do it? Why do we grow hops? And the reality is because if it were easy, it would be boring, right? So this is a small business. It's my side project. It is my hobby. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. And it's fun because we have unique challenges. Probably not that much different than a lot of people in this room, why you write code or why you build software or why you do marketing. If it were easy, it'd be boring. And that's really the net of it. And we love beer. So when I say we, there's myself and 2 of my friends and our landowner, Charlie. And we do it because we love beer. We love Maine. So this is our opportunity to really build something. We all work in technology or financial services. And we do a lot of stuff, right? I'm doing things that are interesting from a Cisco perspective all the time. But in reality, what am I doing? I'm sending emails, I'm sitting in boardrooms and going to meetings, I'm writing on a whiteboard. I'm not really building anything of really lasting value or anything that kind of changes the landscape or changes a big portion of where I am. With this is definitely something that's changing. We have 10 acres now. It looks completely different than it did 10 or 3 years ago as a hayfield. So it's fun, it's something that's physical and tangible, and it's much different than working in the technology industry. And we think, actually most of the hop producing regions, turns out they're good places to grow potatoes as well. We're pretty good at growing potatoes here in the state of Maine. The state of Maine had, I think at its max, we had about 6 million arable acres, or acres that could be used for crops. Now we have about 1.5 million of those acres that are in production. So we've got 4.5 million acres of cropland that's sitting unused, and I could buy it for $1,000 an acre in the county. If I look at Oregon, probably some of you guys live in Portland, Oregon. If I look at cost per acre out there, those guys are paying to expand their hop farms $12,000 to $14,000 per acre to expand those farms. So over time, as we need more hop farms, Maine's a pretty good place to grow hops. And if we do this right and we build the infrastructure, 5 to 10 years from now, Maine could actually be a really interesting player in that hop market because of some of our unique advantages with labor and land costs and things like that. So that's why we do it. So how do you build a hop farm? This is step one. You put one pole in the ground. It's kind of like eating an elephant, right? You follow that one pole with 799 other ones across 10 acres, right? So interesting stories around poles. You wouldn't think poles are an interesting thing. We're really good at growing trees here in the state of Maine. Turns out we don't grow trees that grow really tall, really fast. They have really fat trunks and they grow slowly. And they're not well suited for building a hop yard with. So we actually imported poles from, I guess it was Montana, where these poles came from because they're well suited. We can put them up by hand. They're what all of the growers in the Pacific Northwest use for their hop yards. Now, how did we find the supplier for hop yard polls in this country, right? You know, the yellow pages and say, hop yard supplies? Not really. It turns out we actually, I think it was a Facebook post, just kind of randomly, we saw somebody that was getting a shipment of hop yard poles for an expansion they were doing in Idaho. And, we double-clicked to zoom into the picture, and on the base of one of the poles, it actually had the tag of the lumber yard that it came from. So like I said, you didn't think poles are interesting, but we called those guys up, and they're like, oh, absolutely, we know how to do that. We'll ship you out a load. So they showed up, of course, in the middle of the night, and they didn't have anything to unload them with, and that's a whole other problem story. But anyway, so you put 80 poles per acre in. It's 22-foot poles. Across those 22-foot poles, you put a large trellis system using high tensile strength wire. And then from that big trellis system, and I think there's a picture, I guess I already skipped the picture, but you hang coconut twine, coir twine. Now, who knew that hops prefer to grow up coconut fiber twine that's made in Sri Lanka? I didn't know that. I definitely did not know that 4 years ago. I didn't know where to buy it. I didn't know that I needed it. I didn't know any of that stuff. So I do now, which is good. I also need rhizomes, so I need rootstock for this thing. So whether it's Oregon or Idaho or Washington, you have to get rootstock from somewhere. We chose to partner with a farm in Oregon who's been hugely helpful with us. Turns out if you find a hop farmer that's like 30 years old and really wants to come to the East Coast and get drunk in Portland, he tends to volunteer some information over the course of those trips. So we built a great relationship, and one of those families is very helpful for us to figure out how to do this. You also need a lot of time. You also need a lot of friends to help you do a project like this, because it turns out you can't afford to pay anyone really to help you because you're not going to make any revenue for 3 years. So it helps if those friends are both strong and thirsty, right? So those are two things to look for if you're trying to do a project of this scale. The growing season. So when hops emerge from a dormancy period, that's usually around tax day or so. We'll harvest the initial hop shoots, and they're like little delicate asparagus. We actually sell them to a lot of the restaurants here in Portland as one of the first green vegetables that is available in Maine. So that's kind of fun. We actually eat those, and we have to prune the plants back anyway. We have to artificially hold them back so they all mature at the same time. So we're actually able to produce a little bit of revenue from that, about $45 a pound. Turns out it's the world's most expensive vegetable, believe it or not, is hop shoots. So that's kind of fun. Then what we get to do, and this is where it becomes a scale conversation, right? So I had an interesting conversation with somebody last night about scaling and how it relates to hop farming. Well, in software and in systems, we try to automate as much as possible, right? We don't want the same person doing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, step one in the spring with hops is take that knot right there and tie 2 of them for every plant that you have. I have 10,000 plants. So we tied 20,000 hop knots, and it turns out there's no way to automate that. You have to do it by hand. You get to take the other end of that piece of twine and jam it into the ground using an applicator tool and something called a W-clip that allows that piece of twine to stay in place, and then the hop can climb up it, right? So I don't have a way to automate that. I can't. It's a very difficult scale issue. It's a very labor-intensive process, and that's one of the reasons why it's very difficult to enter the hop market, because it's very, very labor-intensive. We also get to then go around to those 10,000 plants and take a couple of vines from each one of them and train them to grow up this twine. Now, hops, you hear me saying vine with a B. Hops are not a vine, they're a vine. And if you want to know the difference is the hop growth head will actually follow the sun, and that's what allows it to climb up this coconut husk fiber. And in a vine, what you actually have is like suckers or something that actually the vine will attach itself to what it's growing up, and that's the difference. I didn't know that. It's kind of an interesting thing, so if you hear me say vine, that's why I am. Also during the growing season, you get to spend a lot of time figuring out management, so I've got to scout this thing for pests and mildews. I've got to be out there every day because something is always trying to kill it. So we live in a perpetual state of fear during the growing season, because at any point in time, if I talk about software parallels here, I get one release a year. I get one crop, and if I screw it up, I don't make any revenue that year, and I have a very interesting business problem because I have debt and I have things that I have to service from a small business perspective. Anyway, constant state of fear, always on our toes, trying to figure out what the next thing that's going to kill our crop is. So, if all of that goes right, and we have plants, well, now we have 10,000 plants, and we have hop cones on them, and another scale issue. So, if I take a single plant and I harvest the hop cones from it, it will take me 1 man-hour to harvest 5 to 7 fresh pounds of hops, which equals 1 or 2 dry pounds of hops. 1 hour, 1 plant. Can I afford to spend 10,000 hours harvesting hops? Absolutely not, right? So I have another scale issue. So the average hop farm in the US is somewhere around 300 or 400 acres. So the machinery that they have and the processes that they have and all the things that they do are for hop farms that are very, very large. I cannot, as a small business, spend $2 million on a harvesting building, okay? So it turns out in Germany, the average hop farm is like 30 or 40 acres. So what we did is we said, all right, let's go to Germany. It's a business expense, right? That's fun. So we went to Germany and we started drinking, which is what you do when you land in Germany at noon. And essentially what we did is we knew a few people over there. We know a couple hop growers in the Tettnang region. And we went around and basically knocked on hop farms' doors and said, would you like to sell me your old harvester? Because it turns out in Germany, because the hop farms are small, their equipment is sized for smaller farms. Makes sense, right? So what we're looking at here is a Wolf harvester from 1970. And this is the machine that you use. It's a stationary machine you bring hop binds to, and it will remove the cones from the binds, and it will get rid of all the excess stems and leaves and everything like that. So this is how I solve a scale problem with harvesting, right? Because I also have to finish this harvest in 5 to 7 days, or else the plants are not going to be viable anymore. So some interesting things I get to do here. One, meet German hop farmers, learn a few German words, which is fun, drink a lot of German beer, which is great. I also got to figure out intermodal logistics, which is kind of a fun thing because all of a sudden now I pay $2,500 for a German hop harvesting machine that's 50 years old. It's sitting in Tettnang, Germany. I live in Portland, Maine, and my hop farm is in Gorham, Maine. How do I get a 8-foot wide, 12-foot tall, 30-foot long harvesting machine like 7,000 miles across an ocean? Right, so that was a fun one. Basically, what we ended up doing, we made friends with the workshop over there that fixes all these German hop harvesters. They took it, moved it to their workshop. They cut it in half for us. Disassembled pretty much everything about it. Threw it in a container. The container was taken by a truck to the port up in Hamburg. Hamburg took the container and shipped it over to Portland for us, surprisingly cheaply, $2,000 to get a container from Hamburg to Portland. Who knew? Containers are cool. Another software thing. So we got it here. So we got it here, and all of a sudden we have this truck show up with a container on it, and we've got this 10,000, 12,000 pound machine in the back of the truck, and we go, how the hell are we going to get this thing out? We didn't really think that part through, so we had to get a crane, which that was cool too. Didn't know anything about cranes. This is piece number 1 of our harvester. This is actually the top portion of the harvester, and you can see it's suspended there. We are moving it ever so delicately, because another thing we didn't know about cranes is when you lift things in the air that have flat surfaces, guess what? The wind hits them and they start to twist. So right before this picture, we actually bounced this thing off the barn, which was a little bit stressful, but we got to the end of it. So that was fun. And so this thing shows up, and this is the fun of small business and the fun of doing things that are different and thinking about things differently. This harvester showed up in like 1,000 pieces. The instructions, quote unquote, that we got were a series of basically Polaroids from the people that had cut this thing in half. And guess what? There's no manual for a harvester from 1970 in German. So it showed up. You can see actually on the side here, there's some interesting looking wire and panels. Guess what the power system in Europe is, right? It's all 3-phase. This particular machine was 380 volt power. It ran on 50 hertz versus 60 hertz, which is here. So the next step in this, once we finally used some magic, going back to our medieval thing, used some magic to put this thing back together. We had a welder, and obviously a lot of people helped us out. We put it back together, and all of a sudden now we have a 12,000 pound piece of equipment that I can't power on because we're in the U.S. So the next step was figure out how it works, take all of the, I think there's 6 electric motors on there, and retrofit them. So we replaced all the motors, built in all new electrical wire, put all new switches on, put variable frequency drives on. Again, I didn't know anything about any of this stuff, but it was fun to learn, right? So that's the importance, I think, of this being a side project, is it's an expansion of what I'm doing, and it's really fun, and you learn a lot about what's going on, or a lot about different things. We turned this on. This actually showed up the second weekend in August. Hop harvest starts the first day in September. So that was a very compressed time frame to make anything happen. That would probably qualify as a pretty solid sprint that we did to make our harvester work before harvest was ready to go. So anyway, we got it. We used it for harvest. It worked great. It was amazing. Solved all of our scale issues. Here's another piece. 60% of the quality of hops comes after the picking process, right? So after I remove the cones from the vine, 60% of the quality of that is how do I dry it, how do I package it, how do I pellet it. And as you can imagine with all of our craft brewers, the number one thing on their mind is what is the quality of the ingredients that are going into my beer, because they're just like chefs. They want to know they're using the highest quality ingredients, they want to know where they're coming from. So not only do we have to grow hops here in New England and figure out how to do that, we also have to grow quality hops here in New England that are potentially better than what I can get as a brewer from the Pacific Northwest. So anyway, that's fun. Processing is really interesting. This is actually, this is a German hop drying facility. On the left there is a display panel. I was in Tettnang at the Hop Museum, and that panel right there runs a big ass dryer, basically. So the hop cones are wet when they come out. You dry them to a certain moisture density, and you lock in all of the oils, and life is good. So I'm joking with Lucas, the German hop grower that has this, and I go, wow, that is a very advanced hop dryer. He goes, yeah, it's really awesome, right? I look at it and I go, you know, there's a lot of electronics in there. He's like, yeah, I got sensors through this whole thing. I can tell exactly every quadrant inside every one of those drying trays, what the moisture density is. So he's got an extremely dense sensor system inside of this. And then I was joking with him, and I'm like, that thing looks like I could probably get to it from a PC. And he goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. So this is, to my knowledge, the first internet-connected hop dryer in the world. So that was kind of fun. And that's an Internet of Things thing, right? I mean, that is a hop harvesting or a hop drying machine that has an IP address. And actually then, further on, as we were drinking a little bit later in the evening, I go, you don't have an iPhone app for your hop dryer, do you? And he goes, absolutely. And he pulls it up, and he's got an iPhone app, and he can tell what status his hops are at in the various drying. Anyway, pretty cool. And a lot of fun and a lot of learning over there. If you have the opportunity to go to Tettnang, go to the Hop Museum. It's awesome. They just put in a pilot brewery that's really cool, and they're changing a lot of things about German beer over there because the German tastes are adapting. So if everything goes perfectly, you get to do this. You get to take fresh hops and pour them directly into big things of beer. And luckily for us this year, things did go fairly well. We were able to have, 10 to 12 brewers make fresh hop beers with our stuff. Next year we'll have the capability of actually drying here. And this is a lot of fun. You know, walking into the brewery with a couple of big burlap bags full of your own hops and putting them into a beer that you know you're going to be able to drink in about 3 weeks is a pretty good feeling. It's pretty fun. The other thing that's really interesting is it turns out we do a lot on social, right? We are probably the world's best marketed hop farm, considering the number of hops that we make. So, you know, Instagram, Twitter, blogging, Facebook, we do it all, right? We're young, we're tech guys, so obviously we want to tell people what we're doing. Some interesting things about that. It turns out if you put something on the internet and you write about it publicly, maybe it's a blog, everyone automatically assumes you're experts. So year one, we built a trellis. Turns out that trellis was a disaster, but we blogged about it, and it was the most read article on the internet about hop trellises because nobody had ever written about hop trellises. So what ends up happening is that we end up becoming the expert in small craft hop farm trellis construction. So we were not. We had to go back and edit that several times, and we're on our third iteration of trellis now, which actually works fairly well. But that was fun for us because we weren't the experts, but we started conversations with a lot of people we wouldn't otherwise talk to, right? And that's really cool. If you follow us on Instagram, we've got a pretty good Instagram thing out there. We got a lot of stuff going with the brewers. We open up connections and conversations with brewers all the time through our social channels. And we interact with consumers of the beer that's made with our hops too. So it's really fun to be out there and connecting with people on that social layer. So that's it. I am stickered up. So if anybody wants a sticker that is not Jenkins or Ansible or Puppet, we have Hop Yard stickers. If you guys are interested, just buy me a beer tonight on Steve's dime, and I will absolutely give you a sticker. If you guys want to talk hops or talk brewing, I'm always happy to do that as well. So, is everything I got? Awesome.